All right, traders, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Thursday, March 21st, the official kickoff of March Madness. And I was saying earlier in the day that the market was more exciting than looking at than watching some of these games, right? I think normally traders, including myself, are starting to watch some of these games. It's a lot of fun, but I would say the market was a bit more fun today than watching the games. Just huge momentum in the semiconductors. So we'll start there, and then we'll do a little bit of a rewind and talk about all of today's price action. The option activity was fast and furious today. A little bit of a grab for just a lot of momentum plays. We talked about this in last night's video that it seemed like the names that would maybe have, and I don't know if you would put semis in this camp, but a lot of names that don't have that many exposure to the trade, a possible trade deal. But names that are internet names, names that are software names, these names don't have quite as much as exposure to the trade deal, but should do very well under a dovish Fed, right? I mean, those are the main two issues that I see. So if you have one kind of taken away, one worry taken away, which is the Fed, and they're being super dovish, but you still have the other one along with Brexit as well, then what's really going to move on when you take one of those barriers away? And I just thought it was companies and sectors and in groups that aren't positioned so much globally, but and don't have to worry about not necessarily material names and so forth, but more internet type software and those names in that area. But so yeah, the semiconductors. So this was a level. I mean, this was crazy, right? Up 3.5% today, unreal. I think at one point we touched up 4% today. So just crazy move. And this was right at the target that we talked about on Friday, right? When we had this big move, I think this was last Friday, I talked about this virgin point of control. You could see it on my Twitter feed, right? We talked about how $110 marks the spot of where you want to kind of shoot for, and you could see this was the chart, and also the same thing on the weekly as well, right? If you go to the weekly chart, 110, so that 110 area coincided perfectly. So if you saw my recap from last week, hopefully you had this trade in your wheelhouse, and if not, maybe the ETF, but maybe individual names. Because if you drill down to the individual names, AMD, which we had a lot of traders play AMD, that also took out the virgin point of control as well. So really nice move here, and I could probably talk for 15 minutes about all the chip names. So Micron, it's kind of interesting because I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, and I follow the price action and I follow the tape, so sometimes you don't necessarily need to know the reason, but I didn't think there was anything that was really stellar out of the earnings call for Micron. Maybe some of the worries are starting to go away, but I didn't think that maybe it's a little bit less bad than expected, but this was up 9% today. And then the other names that flew up too were Western Digital, up 9.7, and then we saw a big in the money, and I couldn't resist. I had to take, even though I was kind of chasing when I saw these calls. I like to get into the calls that we see on the tape before. A lot of these will look like great setups, and you don't need to always wait for the call activity. This one I was like, it's a name I haven't really been looking at, Seagate, and I saw in the money calls and was able to take one target, but I did not go large because there's no way I wanted to chase with a name that was already up like about 3%. But if it gets out of this range, could be on to this next rung on the ladder up. So I think it's worth a shot. What else was I watching this morning? And I'll give you kind of details about what we do on a day-to-day basis. But I thought IWM was really important. That was pre-market. Remember, we started the day where futures were down in the morning. And IWM, I thought, needed to hold the lows for the week, specifically yesterday's lows. And as soon as we opened, IWM just shot up like a rocket. So really impressive, and it held where it needed to. And kind of shook off. Remember that the first place we were a little bit weak because of Europe, and which again, you come into the day and the DAX is down 1%. future, U.S. futures should be down, but buyers definitely stepped in and retook those levels from yesterday. So really impressive, and it led with the semiconductors, but there was a whole bunch of other groups that did really well today. You go back to the my bread and butter over the last few months, which has been the software names, and look at the software ETF. I mean, here's where your market leadership is. And I mean, up 2.4%. And look at the move out of, on all-time high going out in software names. So again, the FANG stocks are interesting, and it's good to see the FANG stocks catch up like they did yesterday. But really, the market leadership has been this puppy. Software names, and a whole bunch of different software names. So we'll talk a little bit about my trade that we put on, that we sent out. I found Autodesk the other day. I would say this, sometimes it's good to be lucky, right? We put an Autodesk trade on because, again, it was all of a bunch of these names ran up until their earnings. And, all of them had good earnings, but they just ran into the number a little bit too much. So Autodesk was one of those names for me. And I looked at this a couple nights ago on the charts, and I said, wow, this thing is really consolidating and pretty nicely. And I put this on yesterday in the beginning of the day, and it gave one of these fake moves. But somebody came out this morning. Who was it? Well, who was the broker? I think it was Piper, came out and put a street high price target. It was also their analyst day today. But if you take this a step further, there's a little bit of ZS calls. I mean, look at the Z-scaler, which I've been in and out of. Unfortunately, I'm not in it right now because, look at this thing. It's an 84 RSI. Coop was another name that, again, these names had good earnings. This was a nice little buy. And look at this thing out as well. If you just go down the list in this group too, Keys, which is a name that probably nobody's talking about. Keysight Technology doesn't really have any option activity. Doesn't really matter. But this name had barely even dipped after earnings. And again, remember they had good numbers here. I remember watching the tape, and I'm like, what's this stock going to do? And it just kind of digested. It never even sold off. And I did a video on Real Vision, which you can look at Salesforce 52-week high. So if you saw my video about 2 weeks ago, and I'll probably pin that to my Twitter page because I'll give myself a pat on the back. But Salesforce, I had 3 names in a video that I did for Real Vision 2 weeks ago that I talked to buy software names to buy in the dip after earnings. One was Salesforce, 52-week high. The second one was Workday, almost a 52-week high, but perfect bounce off the 50-day moving average. And then the third one was Splunk, and I'm still in Splunk. Splunk actually closed on the highs. So a little bit of a slower reaction, but, great. And I managed to take a target. Look at the MACD crossover. So I think still Splunk, I think, is a good name. Remember, they had good earnings, and they just, all these names, they ran into their number. And I think if you go down the list, I think Team is at a 52-week high. It's just silly. I'm laughing because, what strength in this group. So again, everybody talking about the software names, but I thought these were interesting. I tell you, I didn't even really, I looked at Amazon a couple times today, but man, what a move. And, this was all about that call buyer that we saw. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's not all about that call buyer, but we just haven't seen that much option flow. We started to see it, I think, a couple weeks ago in Amazon. And then really someone, and this was all on our private Twitter feed. This was the first note that I sent on Monday morning. But this was the order, I think, right, if I can find it, from last Friday. This was Wednesday. Friday, let's see if I can find it. And it was a sweep, but maybe it's just not coming. Or maybe I just can't find it this second. This was Thursday. This was it. The 1710 calls. So again, I put this in front of everybody's face Monday morning just to say reminder. They did this big trade, and Friday, even Friday it worked very well. But I mentioned the levels earlier in the week that I liked. Other things that we were kind of concentrating on today. If you go to my private Twitter feed, This is kind of just to give you a visualization because I know I put a lot more information. I'll put information on my regular feed too, but this is what we were looking at today. Square, as soon as I saw Square calls go up, this is a name that's kind of been dormant. And it hasn't triggered officially for me. So we could look at Square. But just the fact that they were aggressively going after Square was enough for me to say, I'm not going to wait and let this thing go without me. I still think it needs to get through 79.17, so I called it a preemptive trade. Sometimes when you really haven't had a trigger yet. And I did not put a huge position on because, again, my rule is to kind of wait for that 79.17 to be taken out. But I still think, and I didn't take any targets today on Square because I think and the funny thing is I was talking to a couple members about Square, and it certainly does. It's kind of, in my opinion, right to take targets in this name because it certainly has been choppy, and it gives you, this right here looked like it was going to go, and if you didn't take a target here, but it gives you this name has been giving you chances to get back into the name, to take targets, and then to get in cheaper. So we'll see this time around. Maybe it's the time that it gets going. I would love that. Notice that the 50-day moving average is kind of caught up with it. So I'm hoping that it goes here because, again, I didn't take any targets in it at all. So what else were we looking at today? Oh, I said Applied Materials I thought would be a really good name. We saw, going back to the semiconductors, we saw a lot of activity in MRVL, and this has been nonstop now for the last 2 weeks in Marvell Technologies. I don't even know, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know the difference of what they do versus like Lam Research or AMD, but I'll tell you, there's been just a boatload of calls that have been going up in MRVL. So I think a lot of traders took this trade in the room today and did pretty well with it. And then, names that didn't see option activity, but I've been watching this Docu. Again, another name that had, and I think this is still a good name to look, even though I took off the trade today because it did exactly what I wanted it to. But Docu right into support. Remember, had great earnings, but they just ran too much. And it's been, 3 or 4 days since earnings, and now you got your bullish engulfing. A few other names. So Autodesk, I started to take profits. Took some profits in Splunk this morning. Talked about Western Digital and the calls that went up there. We talked about IWM, which is really what I was watching, like I said, pre-market. I tried Etsy. I actually took it off just because I have enough trades that were going. I tried playing some Wells Fargo. I made a little bit of money in some lottos. There was a story about them possibly replacing their CEO, which they later came out and denied. We have a little bracket challenge for fun that we're doing. Midday option activity. We talked about the dollar, which I think was really interesting. That was a big story from yesterday, was that the dollar was very weak, and it actually at one point was higher than the open for the dollar. This is UUP that you could see. Another target we took in Autodesk. Put some more analysis on Square. 5 I got out of. I didn't see where this closed. This might be a trade for next week. Another name that's been pretty quiet. Again, it's been struggling to kind of close on the highs. So I had a call position that expired tomorrow, so I wasn't really going to stick around. I almost had a double on 5 from what we put on. And then really interesting, I thought all the Tesla activity today. So Tesla's kind of been in the dumps in terms of performance, but I think it's worth a shot down here. I really wanted this Virgin Point of Control to be taken out. On the daily, it got close, just did not take it out. So I would keep an eye on this name. Here's some of the activity, which I'll bring it up right on the left side of your screen. But a name that really hasn't seen much call activity. Now there's a lot of flow in Tesla, but this one caught my eye. I'll have to check open interest tomorrow. There was one that was also outright. I think it was this one here, the May 325 calls. some June calls. I think there was also a little bit of April's as well. But yeah, I think definitely some buyers were in. You know, I don't know why they would be interested at these levels. So again, it did not close. I think it gave back those gains. Finished up only 15 basis points, I guess. So it kind of trailed off. But keep that name on your watch list. You know, it was also talking about whether or not to kind of take risk at the end of the day. Here's where I dumped Etsy. Nothing wrong with it. Just just a little bit too much risk that I had on my books, and just wanted to pare down into today's strength. So EWI, this is the South Korea ETF, and there was also some Taiwan semiconductor calls, but again, not a huge trade. Decent sized trade, 200,000. But what is EWI? Well, it's South Korea, but if you look at the holdings of this ETF, it's about 22% of this ETF is Samsung, right? So it's a really easy way to play Samsung. And you would think that if these names, all these other semi names are going to rally, possibly Samsung gets going as well. Also MACD crossover here. So something, a little bit different to take. I also jumped out of another software name, just pairing risk a little bit. Nothing wrong with that. We played Zuo for earnings. I played, just a small $300 bet, but unfortunately, that didn't work, and I'm playing with the house money. But yeah, again, I will always talk about the losers as well. This one, yeah, no good. I don't really. They didn't have great numbers, but they didn't have bad numbers either. They were actually a little bit better than expected, but maybe they were looking for better numbers. Also, Nike is down, and Cintas. So all names that I saw reporting earnings, all three of them look the same, which is kind of odd a bit, I thought, because I thought Nike's numbers were good. I didn't dissect them completely. The last trade I would say for option activity was JD.com. A lot of calls being bought. May 27s. Let's see, what did they get up to in volume? I think it was around, last I checked, was around 9,000. But I'll tell you, this name is right on the cusp. Yeah, 9.4. So that's over. That was over open interest. Open interest was 6,000 on the May 29. But take a look at the weekly chart in JD. JD really ramped into the close, which is kind of what you want to see. But it's right at that bottom. So this is the weekly chart, and this is the value area for the whole year. Right about to get into value. And it's been knocking on the door here for the last couple weeks. You want to look at the daily chart as well. Daily chart, I think, also is looking very constructive. Yeah, it's also above the 200-day moving average. So it is right there, and I think you got a virgin point of control up here, which would be your first target. And then maybe up to here resistance. I got a dotted line drawn here, which I think makes sense. But I like that name. It'll be really interesting to see what China does if they manage to rage. There wasn't a lot of names that got going in the Chinese internet group, but maybe they do tonight. So keep an eye on the Shanghai, keep an eye on the Hang Seng. I think this K-Web looks interesting here. And BABA also, has just been sitting around. So we'll see what China does overnight. I think that'll be really interesting. And then my final note, just after kind of summary. So first of all, if you want access to our private Twitter feed, you could go ahead and email me at cfromhertz@Tribeca Trade Group. So again, cfromhertz at Tribeca Trade Group. Happy to discuss membership options, but someone asked me the other day. They said you're not doing what you guys aren't doing trials anymore. No, because what happens is somebody comes in the room for like a day, and that's really not a proxy of what we're doing. We're in this for the long haul, and we're having a fabulous year, and our analysis is, I think, top notch. So I think it's well worth the money. So check us out, either tribecatradegroup.com, or you can go ahead and email me. My quick market thought is, just don't know what this market's going to do on day to day. I mean, I think it's been very constructive. Like I said, I liked that IWM held where it needed to, but I think it's also important. It kind of felt today like it was a little bit too euphoric. I saw a lot of victory laps too on Twitter, which, this is all part of the process. So this is the put call ratio. I think it was a little bit low. So yeah, I mean, that kind of backs up the euphoric, right? I mean, that tells me that there's a little bit too much bullish sentiment out there when I look at the put call ratio. Again, doesn't mean that we can't go higher, but it's starting to get it's kind of starting to feel euphoric, and I think there's too much of, I don't know, giving bears a hard time. I mean, this is it is what it is. I'm not here to be right or wrong. We're here to make money. So I could care less about all the Twitter nonsense that goes on with taunting and so forth, bullish and bearish. That should not concern you. You should be concerned with trying to make money, not trying to be right on Twitter. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. But I just think that this was another gift. So you got to make sure that you're taking profits. Again, I'm not giving any advice. Videos for information purposes only, but I think especially manage your short-term options different than your long-term positions, right? Your short-term option positions are going to be much more sensitive, so you could do a whole bunch of trade management, like rolling your positions out and up, taking some off the table, and then also even converting your positions to either leaps or even stock, and then just watching the stock with tight stops. I think a little bit easier to do than with short-term option positions. All right, so that's it. A little bit longer video than normal. Thank you for watching. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.